and that sort of thing, I began to realize this was very fishy, and it was my wife who pointed out to me by going through the Yellow Pages that there are these services that you can call that will allow you to set up a voicemail anywhere in the country under almost any area code, you know. And it was clear that he had just faked these voicemail boxes. But I realized that this is the kind of charge. If you're gonna be suspecting somebody of fabricating, you have to prove it. You know, you can't just level that charge without proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That was the way I approached it, because it's such a serious charge, and there's a presumption of innocence, right? So he then arranged to have his brother, unbeknownst to me, call me and represent himself as one of the people in this story. And when I heard an actual human voice purporting to be one of Steve's sources, I thought, wow, you know, there's reasonable doubt. Because, hey, here's sort of an actual person who seems to be real. And it wasn't until I discovered later that that person was his brother that all my reasonable doubt disappeared.
How did you figure that out?
Serendipitously, because late at night on the Friday, this all started on a Thursday afternoon, another editor of the magazine and I were talking about the situation on the phone, and she just kind of casually mentioned that Steve had a brother who lived in Palo Alto. And this is depicted in the movie. The phone number that he had given me for this software company was a Palo Alto phone number. And the voice I had heard on the phone had sounded oddly similar to Steve's. So I put two and two together. And the next morning, I went into the New Republic, and Steve was there, apparently trying to, you know, get rid of some evidence that was in his computer. And I confronted him about it. And at first he denied that it was his brother. And then, again, as depicted in the movie, he fessed up. Yes, I had my brother pretend to be this person. And I did it because even though that person is real, I couldn't find him and I needed to buy some time, which was obviously not true. And that was the end of his career.
Did he try to play you? Did he try to manipulate you?
Absolutely. Every step of the way. And he tried everything. You know, that Thursday night, I repeat, it all began on a Thursday. He called me at home late at night, and he became kind of aggressive. He said, you know, Chuck, you're not backing me up. You're making me feel very attacked. You know, an editor is supposed to back people up. And he was trying to throw me on the defensive. And what I remember saying to him was, you know, Steve, I want to back you up, but I don't have enough to work with right now. You have to give me more to work with. And what that illustrates is that at every point I was trying to remain even-handed with him, at least never tip my hand about where I was heading with this, and never become emotional, because I think he would have tried. I even somehow intuitively sensed then that he would try to exploit that. The next day when, you know, I took him out to that hotel and made him walk around the site of this alleged event, which also helped prove that it hadn't happened. Then we get into the car on the way back, and he broke down and he said, okay, I made up it's the conference and all the events in the story are real, but I made up the fact that I was there. I heard about it later, and I made it seem in the article like I was there. And then he said, but if you want me to say that I made the whole article up, I'll do that if it'll help you. And I saw that as a trap, you know, that he was going to try and make and do that and then say later that I'd coerced him into saying something that wasn't true. So I responded to him, no, Steve, I just want you to tell me what the truth is, you know. So he was at every moment, every step of the way, fighting to preserve his position at the magazine or whatever, to preserve his whole career. And he didn't hesitate to manipulate and lie.
Once you figured out, okay, this piece was a total fabrication, and a lot of other pieces were completely or partially fabricated as well, how did you figure out how to handle it? How to handle it with Glass was complicated but easy in the sense that you fire him. I mean, it's hard to do,
right.
You do it, you fire him. But how to discuss this to the public, to your readers, to the rest of the press, that's really, really hard. So what was your thought process like about how to reveal this information to the public?
Well, one thing I had as like a bottom line principle was there would be no cover up, right? That we would never find out anything about this case from anybody else through the press. So I wanted us to break the whole story before anyone else. And my first step in that regard was on Sunday, May the 10th, I called up Howie Kurtz of the Washington Post, who covers the media, and I just laid out to him what we knew at that point and that we were firing Steve Glass so that that would be out in the media before the Forbes story came out. That was step one. Then the follow-on step to that was we have to find out everything he did. You know, we have to completely investigate all of his stories and any other conduct, you know, that we might have to answer for and get that into the magazine as soon as possible. And furthermore, announce an apology for all of this and announce that we're going to investigate. So we did all that on Monday and Tuesday, and I thought one of the things that was good about that was that I involved the whole staff in this investigation of Steve's material, and I always felt that that gave some people something to do with their emotions at that time, you know, that everybody was feeling so lousy and so angry and everything else. This gave people something to channel that into, and we all kind of worked together on it. There is a part of all that, dealing with the media, though, that I sort of regret in hindsight. You know, I was so kind of worried about how we would be treated and didn't for a minute expect that people would actually appreciate the fact that we were doing this full disclosure, that I became initially somewhat defensive with some reporters who approached me, and in a couple of cases I kind of just turned them away and said, I don't want to talk to you. And that was a real mistake, you know, and I think it was just a mistake I made at the beginning that even now I sort of regret. And that's one reason ever since, when I realized how bad it was not to be fully open with some people while being open with others, that I've always done interviews about this, because I just don't want, even now, I don't want anybody to say that, you know, there's some reluctance to discuss this.
Charles Lane is the editor at The New Republic who revealed the fabrications of the magazine's staff writer Stephen Glass. The movie Shattered Glass is based on their story. Lane will be back in the second half of the show. I'm Terry Gross, and this is Fresh Air. This is Fresh Air. I'm Terry Gross. Let's get back to our interview with Charles Lane, the editor at The New Republic, who investigated a story by the staff writer Stephen Glass and found that Glass had fabricated the entire story. After Lane initiated a further evaluation of Glass's writing, The New Republic discovered that 27 of Glass's 41 pieces for the magazine contained fabrications. The new movie Shattered Glass tells the story of how Glass's lies were discovered. Charles Lane now covers the Supreme Court for The Washington Post. In June of 1998, The New Republic published a letter to its readers apologizing for the Stephen Glass fabrications and trying to explain as best as you could what happened. So I thought I'd read a short excerpt of that letter. How could this happen? It's a perfectly fair question. We've been asked it repeatedly since we informed the press of Glass's firing, and we expect to be confronted with it again and again. We are asking it of ourselves. The editors of The New Republic, like those of other magazines, have devised fact-checking procedures to ensure the accuracy of our copy. Generally, we believe our record in this regard has been a good one. Plainly, however, the precautions we took were not adequate to prevent Glass's fabrications from making it into print. We intend to find out why and to take corrective action where necessary. We editors take responsibility for the failures of discernment that permitted this false material to be published, but it is important to understand that our editing and fact-checking systems are designed to defend against the errors and mistakes even good professionals sometimes make, not against the systematic and intentional deceptions of someone who actually has no business practicing journalism. So that's an interesting distinction you make there, that fact-checking is for good journalists who kind of make a mistake, not for people who are intentionally liars and who are trying to manipulate the system.
Yeah, it's not fraud checking, as some people have said. And Steve really went to great lengths to deceive fact checkers, as has been noted before. You know, he made up false notes. He staged false voicemails, I later found out. He would occasionally invent documents. And so, you know, it was a pretty wide-ranging effort at deception. You know, I think one of the procedural things that was going on at the New Republic that made Steve possible was that he just happened to come along at a time when there was a lot of internal turmoil and transition among the editors of the New Republic. It was not a good time organizationally for the magazine. So he came on, I think, in late '95, and Andrew Sullivan was the editor. Andrew left the magazine, and suddenly, in the middle of 1996, and Michael Kelly was hired to replace him, but Mike, because he was under contract to the New Yorker, didn't come for about 6 months. So between about the middle of 96 and the end of 96, there was no editor of the New Republic. There was a series of sort of substitutes. And that was when Steve started writing more pieces. Then Mike Kelly came in. He only lasted for about 9 months. And, of course, Steve really began to really take off in that 9 months. And then I came in, and with each new editor, there would be new fact checkers and new kind of subordinate editors. And there was a tremendous amount of turnover. And therefore, hard for any one person to kind of track Steve Glass through that. And I think he really exploited that kind of vacuum of authority. In addition, the New Republic had problems prior to this with another journalist called Ruth Shalit, who had plagiarized some material and had been suspended and, really created kind of a black mark on the magazine. And I think a lot of the editors were focused on making sure, that Ruth Shalit was performing up to snuff. And, that kind of distracted attention from what anybody else, including Steve, might be doing. So it's very unfortunate, that this, I think, reflects also that it was kind of just a rough and tumble and uncertain and disorganized time at the New Republic generally, which kind of, I think, unbeknownst to anyone, created a climate that Steve could exploit.
Did you make any changes in the fact-checking system after the Stephen Glass story?
Yes. We developed a whole new written policy. We sort of cracked down on the use of unnamed sources and a lot of other things. But I have to say two things about that. Fact-checking at the New Republic is never going to be like fact-checking at a place like the New Yorker or Newsweek, that are sort of like really big organizations with a lot of resources and large staffs. And the New Republic is a very small, low-budget magazine that never, I think, has ever had more than 3 people fact-checking, say, 20 stories a week. That's just a reality. And so there are going to be limits on it. And even, I believe very firmly that even the most sophisticated fact-checking system would be hard-pressed to stop certain kinds of journalistic fraud. I've seen, the New York Times Magazine, which is an outstanding magazine with great fact-checking, has recently had to disavow the reporting of one of its people who had created a false composite character in a story. So there is no procedural fix, Terry, to the problem of a fraudulent journalist, because if somebody, for whatever purpose, is intent on doing it, they'll figure out the fact-checking system and find where its holes are and then try to exploit the holes.
Well, Stephen Glass was a fact-checker for a brief time at the New Yorker, so he knew the system.
Well, at the New Republic,
at the New Republic. Yeah, I'm sorry, yeah.
Yeah, Steve had been a fact-checker and was known as a very thorough and rigorous one, which was all part of his scam, because another reason people didn't suspect his own work was that he ostensibly was so concerned about facts. But yeah, he was entrusted with that responsibility, quite mistakenly, of course.
If there were warning signs about Stephen Glass before he was actually uncovered, what were those signs?
Well, a number of times people wrote letters to the editor, not while I was editor that I recall, but prior to that, a number of letters to the editor were written where people said, this just didn't happen, it's not true. And, I think that was looked into, and Steve, came up with a lie that seemed to account for it, and, people moved on. So that's very unfortunate. But again, I go back to this. It's very hard to make this charge, Terry. It's very hard to go to somebody and say, you know what, I think you might have fabricated. Prove to me that you didn't. Because it's such a serious charge. It's like accusing a priest of, violating his vows of poverty and obedience. It goes so to the heart of the profession that unless you feel very strongly you have the evidence, you don't initially make it.
Are there specific examples of how the fact-checking process